She stood at his garage door in designer heels and a silk blouse that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Nervous energy radiating off her like heat from summer asphalt. And the first words out of her mouth were, "I know this sounds insane, but would you pretend to be my boyfriend this weekend?" Ethan Rivers looked up from the transmission he was rebuilding, grease covering his calloused hands, confusion written all over his face, because this woman, this clearly wealthy woman, had no business being in his run-down garage on the wrong side of town. "Ma'am, I think you have the wrong person," he said quietly, already turning back to his work because he'd learned long ago that when something seemed too strange, it usually was. But she didn't leave. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "No, I saw you last week on Route 9. You helped to that elderly couple with the broken radiator. You wouldn't take their money." Then it clicked. The old sedan, overheating in the brutal heat. Harold and Martha, their faces lined with worry and age, stranded on the side of the highway. He'd pulled over without thinking, spent 40 minutes fixing their radiator hose with spare parts from his truck, and when Harold tried to press a $20 bill into his hand, Ethan had seen Martha quietly counting change in her purse, and he'd smiled and said, "No, sir, just pay it forward someday." What he hadn't seen was the black luxury car pulled over 50 yards ahead, its engine also overheating, and the young woman in the expensive business suit who'd missed her meeting because she couldn't stop watching him work. Watching the way he treated those strangers, like they were family. Someone had filmed it, posted it online. Mechanic refuses payment from struggling elderly couple. 3.7 million views in 2 days. But the woman standing in his garage didn't need the video. "I was there," she said, her polished exterior starting to crack like old paint. "I saw your face when you handed their money back. I saw how you made them feel like they mattered." She sat down on his workbench uninvited, her designer clothes completely out of place among the oil stains and socket wrenches. And she told him her name was Claire Montgomery, 28 years old, CEO of a tech startup worth $40 million. And she was drowning in loneliness so deep she could barely breathe. "My family reunion is this weekend," she said, and her voice was hollow. "They're all going to be there. My mother, who thinks I've wasted my life on a career. My sister, who got married at 22 and never lets me forget it. My father, who barely acknowledges I exist unless I'm making him money. And every single one of them is going to ask why I'm still alone, why I can't just be normal, why I'm such a disappointment. I need someone kind, someone real, just for 2 days. Someone who can look at me like I'm worth something beyond my bank account." Ethan wiped his hands slowly, studying her. He was 33, had inherited this garage after cancer took his father 3 years ago, and he understood bone-deep loneliness in ways most people never would. The kind that settles in your chest at 3 in the morning when you realize you're building something but you're building it alone. "I'll pay you whatever you want," Claire said, desperation creeping into her voice. "50,000 for the weekend. 100,000? Name your price." "No." His voice was firm but gentle. "If I do this, it's because you need help, not because you're buying it. I don't want your money, Miss Montgomery, but I'll help you if you really need it." The reunion was being held at a massive lakeside estate upstate, the kind of place Ethan had only seen in magazines. He borrowed his friend Marcus's truck and picked up Claire early Saturday morning. She'd transformed back into her corporate armor. Perfect makeup, designer dress. But her hands shook so badly, she could barely buckle her seatbelt. "What if they see through this?" she whispered as they drove. "What if they know you're just being paid to be here?" "I'm not being paid," he reminded her, "and if they see through it, you're still you either way. That's enough. It has to be enough." Her sister Victoria met them at the door with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Claire," she said with false sweetness dripping from every word, "you actually brought someone? How surprising! I didn't think you had time for dating between all those board meetings." The weekend unfolded like a stage play written by someone who hated the lead actress. Claire's mother, Eleanor, watched them with hawk eyes, cataloging every interaction, every word, looking for cracks in the facade. Her father, Richard, barely looked up from his phone during conversations, treating his daughter's existence like an inconvenience. Cousins exchanged knowing glances and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "She probably hired him. Did you see his truck? He's clearly not from our world." During dinner Saturday night, Eleanor went for the throat. "You're 28, darling," she said, her voice saccharine and viscous. "When are you going to stop playing businesswoman and focus on what actually matters? Building a family, carrying on our legacy. Your sister already has 2 beautiful children. What do you have? A company that will be obsolete in 5 years and an empty apartment." Ethan's fork clinked against his plate. The sound cut through the tension like a gunshot. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, and his voice was steady but carried an edge of steel. "I've watched Claire this weekend. I've watched how she listens when people talk, really listens, not just waits for her turn to speak. I've watched her notice when someone needs something before they even ask. I've watched her be kind even when people are cruel to her. Seems to me that's exactly what matters. The rest is just noise." The table went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the expensive carpet. Claire's eyes filled with tears, because no one, not one person in her entire life, had ever defended her like that. Not to her family. Not when it mattered. Later that night she found Ethan by the lake, skipping stones across the dark water under a full moon. "Why did you say that?" she asked quietly. "You barely know me. You could have stayed quiet, and this would all be over tomorrow." "Ich know, Inog," he said without looking at her. "I know you stopped to help a little kid find his mother yesterday when everyone else just walked past. I know you called your assistant in the middle of dinner to check on her daughter who's sick. I know you tip service workers double when no one's watching. My dad taught me something before he died. He said, kindness isn't about how much money you make, or what you drive, or where you live. It's about showing up. It's about making people feel less alone in this world. And right now, you need someone to show up for you." "I feel less alone with you," Claire whispered. "I haven't felt this way I can't even remember how long. Maybe never." Sunday morning brought devastation. Victoria cornered Ethan by the coffee station, her smile predatory. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Or rather, I know who you're not. I know Claire's worth $40 million and you fix cars for a living. I know she's desperate enough to pay someone to pretend to care about her. So, what's your angle? How much is she giving you to play pretend boyfriend? How much did it take to buy your integrity?" Ethan set down his cup very slowly. "I'm hoping," he said, meeting her eyes without flinching, "that your sister realizes she doesn't need to prove anything to people who should already see how extraordinary she is." Claire heard everything. She was standing just around the corner, frozen, as her sister's words cut into her like knives. When Victoria walked away triumphantly, Claire found Ethan packing his bag in the guest room, her face completely unreadable. "You knew what they'd think," she said. "You knew exactly how this would look, that they'd assume I paid you, that they'd mock both of us." "Yeah," Ethan said, meeting her eyes. "I knew. Did it anyway. Why? Why would you put yourself through this? Because you asked for help. Asa, it's simple. Because you needed someone to see you as a person, not a portfolio, not a disappointment, not a failure, but just a human being who deserves kindness. Because everyone deserves to feel worthy, even if it's just for one weekend." She broke then, quietly. The way people break when they've been strong for so long they've forgotten how to be anything else. This powerful woman who'd built an empire from nothing but couldn't build a bridge to her own family. Ethan held her while she cried. Didn't say anything, just let her be human for once in her carefully constructed life. They drove back in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd shared something real, in a world full of pretense. "Addis Garahe," Claire finally spoke. "I can't pay you. You won't let me. But I want to do something. I need to do something." "Then show up for yourself," Ethan said. "Stop living for their approval. Stop trying to be what they want. Just be who you are. That's enough. That has to be enough." If you're watching this story, take a moment to think about the people in your life who've defended you when you couldn't defend yourself. The ones who showed up when they had nothing to gain. Comment below and tell us what you would have done in Ethan's place. Would you have helped a stranger face their family? Would you have stood up at that dinner table? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Kindness Stories Global, because we believe the world needs more stories about people who choose compassion over comfort. Claire drove away that Sunday afternoon with tears on her cheeks and something shifting in her chest, something that felt almost like hope. But life has a way of testing the lessons we learn. 3 weeks passed, then one Tuesday, A single mother named Rosa pulled into Ethan's garage in a Honda that sounded like it was dying. Her son, Miguel, sat in the back seat, maybe 7 years old, wearing a school uniform that had been washed so many times the colors were fading. Rosa explained in broken English that she was on her way to a job interview, her first real opportunity in months. But the car had started smoking, and now she had no way to get there and no money to fix it, and she was so sorry for wasting his time. But could he just tell her what was wrong so she'd know for next time when she'd saved enough money? Ethan spent an hour fixing her car, replaced the radiator hose and the serpentine belt, checked her oil and her brake pads, and found 3 other problems she didn't even know she had. When Rosa asked how much she owed, her hands shaken as she counted crumpled bills from her purse, he said nothing, just smiled and said, "Get to your interview and drive safe." Rosa stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. She asked again, how much? He told her again, no charge. She burst into tears. Right there in his garage, hugged him so tight he could barely breathe, and Miguel hugged his leg and said, "You're like a superhero." As Rosa drove away, wiping her eyes and waving through the window, another car pulled into the lot. A modest sedan, nothing fancy. Claire stepped out, and she looked different. Still put together, still professional, but softer somehow, more real. "I've been thinking about kindness," she said without preamble. "About showing up. About what you said. I want to start a foundation to help people like that woman who just left. People who are one car breakdown away from losing everything. People who need someone to see them. But I need a partner. Someone who understands what help actually looks like. Someone who knows the difference between charity and dignity." Ethan raised an eyebrow, leaning against his workbench. "You offering me a job?" "A partnership," Claire corrected. "Between someone who understands wealth and someone who understands worth. We could do real good, Ethan. The kind that matters. The kind my family would never understand." They built something extraordinary. The foundation started small, helping a few families a month with car repairs, rent assistance, medical bills. But word spread. Stories traveled. The mechanic who fixed cars in Hearts became something of a local legend. People started coming to his garage, not just because their cars were broken, but because they'd heard about the man who helped without judging, who listened without dismissing, who saw people the way everyone deserves to be seen. His business grew. He hired 2 employees, then 5, then 8, expanded the garage, opened a second location. But he never stopped doing free repairs for those who needed them. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, rain or shine, his garage was open for anyone who couldn't afford to pay, and Claire's foundation covered the costs. They created a system that worked, that sustained itself, that grew. Within 2 years, they'd helped over 3,000 families. Within 5 years, they'd expanded to 4 cities. But something else happened, something neither of them expected. The viral video news outlets picked up the story. The mechanic and the CEO who built a kindness empire. They were invited to speak at conferences, at schools, at community centers. Ethan was terrified of public speaking, but Claire stood beside him every time, and together they told their story. Not a love story, because they never fell in love, never became a couple, but something deeper, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose, a partnership that proved kindness multiplies when you give it away. One evening, 5 years after that first weekend, Claire visited the garage. It was bustling now, alive with purpose and noise and hope. Young mechanics in training, apprenticeships for kids from rough neighborhoods, a community bulletin board covered in thank you notes and photos. "Look at what you've built," Claire said softly, watching Ethan teach a teenager named Deshawn how to change brake pads. "Look at what we built," Ethan corrected, the same way he always did. They were invited to speak at a fundraiser, black tie, event, the kind Claire used to attend alone, feeling like a ghost among the living. Now she stood at the podium with Ethan beside her in a borrowed suit, and when someone asked about her success, about how she'd built something so meaningful, she smiled and her voice didn't shake anymore. "Someone once showed up for me when he had nothing to gain," she said, "when I was drowning and didn't even know how to ask for help. He taught me that the greatest currency in the world isn't money or power or status. It's kindness. It's seeing people. It's showing up even when it's uncomfortable, even when there's no reward, even when the world tells you it doesn't matter. And the most beautiful thing about kindness is that the more you give it away, the richer everyone becomes." Ethan added quietly, looking out at the crowd of wealthy donors who'd never worked a day with their hands. "My father used to say that we're all just walking each other home. Every single one of us. And the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. Not just money, though that matters, but time, attention, dignity, the willingness to see someone's humanity when they've forgotten it themselves." After the event, as they walked to their cars, Claire stopped, turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she said, "for that weekend, for not letting me pay you, for showing me what it looks like when someone chooses people over profit. You saved my life. You know that, right? You literally saved my life." Ethan shook his head. "You saved your own life. I just held up a mirror so you could see what was already there." 3 years later, Claire's family reunion came around again. She'd avoided them since that disastrous weekend, cut ties with most of them, built boundaries that protected her peace. But this time, she decided to go. Not because she needed their approval, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because she wanted them to see who she'd become. She brought Ethan again, but this time as her best friend, her business partner, the person who knew her better than anyone. And this time, when Eleanor made a cutting comment about Claire's choices, Claire didn't flinch. She smiled and said, "I've helped 3,000 families rebuild their lives. I've created jobs for 150 people. I've built something that will outlast all of us, and I did it with the help of the kindest person I've ever met. So, if that makes me a disappointment to you, I can live with that. The garage is still there, still fixing cars, still changing lives, still proving every single day that kindness isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing any of us can choose." Rosa, the single mother from that Tuesday, got the job, worked her way up to management. Now she volunteers at the foundation every weekend, teaching financial literacy to other single parents. Miguel, her son, is 16 now, works part-time at the garage, wants to be a mechanic like Ethan. The cycle continues. The kindness multiplies. And sometimes late at night, when the garage is quiet and the work is done, Ethan thinks about that weekend 5 years ago, about the woman in designer heels who walked into his garage asking for help, about the choice he made to show up for a stranger, about how one moment of choosing compassion over convenience changed everything, not just for him, not just for Claire, but for thousands of people whose lives were touched by what they built together. Because that's the thing about kindness. It doesn't just help the person you give it to. It ripples outward, it multiplies. It creates a current that carries everyone forward. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes back around when you need it most. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists in this world, do us a favor like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment and tell us about a time someone showed up for you when they didn't have to. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Would you have defended a stranger at that dinner table? Would you have built something from one act of kindness? Subscribe to Kindness Stories Global, because we're building a community of people who believe that compassion is contagious, that integrity matters, that the smallest acts of courage can change everything. Hit that notification bell because every week we bring you true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that prove we're all capable of being the light in someone else's darkness. Stories that remind us we're all just walking each other home. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, the next time you have a choice between convenience and compassion, choose compassion. Every single time. The world is counting on people like you.